Hallo? Ik was er even niet volgens mij. Ik heb af en toe een wegvallende verbinding. Dat is heel vervelend.
Daar heb ik ook last van.
Was ik
Maar vries je wel eens een beetje en ineens was het weg.
Ja, ik was gevroren. Oké. Hope you can hear me. Let's record. Oh, he's recording. Ik hoop dat die opname van grammatica er is. Oké hoor. Dat is goed. Gaat hier een kwakende eend. Zo. Even wat dingen opzoeken hoor. Oké. Ik ben er klaar voor. Welcome. This is Tuesday, 28th of July. Hooray! And we're almost finishing the lesson of chapter 6, and then new module starts, and that is very exciting because then we are going to look at how words are formed and how sentences are formed. So I asked you to study yourself, and we're going to look at it now. Are you still there? Oh.
Freezing again.
Yeah, I see it. My internet connection is not stable. I need to call my provider because it's now getting irritating. I'm out. I'm in. I'm out. I'm in. So I don't know what I can do about that. Okay, let's hope it doesn't bother us too much. The last lesson of chapter 6 was about what happens when you put an article before a weak letter. And my whiteboard, share. Yes, I got a clean whiteboard done. So we're going to look at the article before weak letters. And weak letters are the coal mine letters, for instance. And the gutturals plus resh. And within this category, you have very weak letters like the aleph and the ayin, and the coal mine, the mem and the yud, and some stronger letters like hey and chet. So there is some different, what is going to happen when you put the definite article hey together with the dagesh forte before a weak letter. And it goes especially what happens with the dagesh. And we remember that the dagesh forte is part of the definite article. It's part of it. There's three elements: the hey, the patach, and the dagesh forte. But as you know, gutturals have no Dagesh forte, or no Dagesh at all. Forte nor, but no Fata. And the coal mine letters, they drop the Dagesh. So that's why it's interesting to know what is going to happen with the Dagesh forte when you put the article hey before one of these letters. And he's going to create a table, and the table looks very complicated, but it's not. The table tells you about 4 categories. No doubling. What's the other one? There's a special word. Implied doubling. This means no doubling because the Dagesh is omitted. They just do if the Dagesh is not there. So this is 1. 2, 3 is compensatory lengthening. Of the vowel before. And 4 is harmonization. So this table looks very complicated, but I make it very simple now. There are 4 categories in the table for article before weak letters. Four categories. Dagesh is omitted, so you see no doubling. It just is, the Dagesh is gone. It's whoosh. In the second category, there is no Dagesh in the word, but you assume it is there. And now I can use this. This is better. The third category is that, let's take this. Yeah, the vowel before becomes longer. Maybe you must say that. That's better. The vowel becomes longer. And the fourth category, harmonization, so that vowels are the same. One example is, for instance, the word eretz. It starts with an aleph and a segol, but it changes to a kametz when you put the article. So it's haaretz and not haeretz. It's haaretz. The word is eretz, but it's when the article, when het lidwoord er dus voorkomt, verandert de klinker, the vowel in the word eretz, and it changes to the vowel of the article. Okay, so this table looks, this is a very simple version of it, but he's going to discuss when is the Dagesh omitted, so there's no doubling. When there is implied doubling, you assume it is there, but you don't see it. compensatory lengthening, that means that the vowel becomes longer. And where does the vowel become longer? The vowel becomes longer in the article. That means the patach becomes a kametz. Okay, now have a look at the video. It's a long video. If you have any questions, please unmute yourself and ask the questions, and I can stop the video. Article before weak letters. There we go.
Article before weak letters. This module will look at what happens when we attach the article to words that begin with letters that cannot double. If you remember, our article has three parts. We have the consonant, hey, the vowel, which is a patach, and following that we have the doubling of the next consonant, or the gemination of the next consonant. So this is a dagesh forte. Remember, three parts. This is the part that people tend to forget. But what happens if the letter that's sitting here, the first letter of your word, can't double? Then other things need to happen. And we've seen two groups of letters that do that. One is gadol and resh, and the other are the coal mine letters. Now, the rules for attaching articles to weak letters are complicated. At least I find them a bit of a mess. And I've tried to simplify this as much as possible. The best way I could think of doing this was simply to put it all into one chart, and we'll go through it. So it'll look a bit intimidating at first, but we'll walk through it. So here's our chart. Now, let me talk you through this. Note first of all how this chart works. On the left here we have the four types of things that happen. In some cases the dagesh will simply be omitted. In other cases we'll have what we call implied doubling or virtual doubling. In other words, we're going to say, okay, we don't see any doubling, but we're going to pretend it's happening for a reason. Another is compensatory lengthening. This is where the vowel that precedes the guttural changes, it lengthens to compensate for the fact we don't have doubling. We've seen this before. We saw this in the case of quiescent aleph. If aleph loses its vowel, effectively making the word shorter, then the vowel previous to it will tend to lengthen. It'll lengthen to compensate. And finally, there's something called harmonization, where the vowel under the first root letter will harmonize with the vowel under the article. So, the four categories of things that can happen. Now, in the first one here, we notice we have a yud and a mem. This is what happens with a couple of the coal mine letters. The rest of these all concern gadols and resh. And, okay, so why don't we jump right into the chart here and look at the first section. So dagesh is omitted in the case of a mem or a yud. Now these are only two of the coal mine letters. It doesn't happen to all the coal mine letters, but the mem and the yud, remember those are part of the coal mine mnemonic. If they're followed by a vocal shava, they will drop the dagesh, no dagesh present. The vowel under the article stays the same. This is normal, ha, with the patach. And here's an example. Yiladim means children, and it starts with a yud. You put the article on it, the hey, and the patach. We would expect the yud to be doubled, but in fact it doesn't. Now, there is an exception to this rule. The exception is that if...
I'm going to pause here for a second. He says the yud and the mem, but it is important to note the yud followed by a schwa and the mem followed by a vocal schwa. Remember the coal mine letters? coal mine, they lose their Dagesh forte when they are with a vocal schwa. Dus if these letters are followed by a vocal schwa, like here, me and je ladim, it's a vocal schwa, it's not a silent schwa because it's at the beginning of the word, therefore at the beginning of a syllable, therefore it is vocal. The schwa at the beginning of a word and at the beginning of a syllable is vocal. So when you have a vocal schwa with the letter yud or with the letter mem, then you put the article before it, and then the doubling disappears. And so something I needed to add that because maybe you have not seen these little schwas over here. It's not with every word that starts with a yud or a mem. It is for words that start with a u and an or a mem followed by a vocal schwa. And then you add the article hey, and then their doubling is omitted. I hope this little bit of things helped you. Oh, I can push. Yes? Yep. Noortje asked, let's do clear. Clear my drawing. Yes, haha, that works. He makes a little mistake here, but he sees when you have ha, Yeladim means children. When you have the children, this becomes CVC. So it becomes CVC. And the schwa under the last, this one, when you go this one. So the schwa under the last consonant is always silent because it is a syllable marker. So good question, because he makes a mistake when he says it now. He says Hayuladim, but he corrects himself later. Okay. All right. Let's continue. No, not that one. Oh, I need to put out annotate.
These, the yud and the mem, are followed by two of the gutturals, the ein and the hey. Then in fact the dagesh will stay. Again, the vowel is normal, so there's no change there. So here we had hayiladim, or hayladim, I suppose I should say that, where the dagesh is no longer there in the yud. However, Yehudim, Jews, the dagesh is there, if you can see that. And that's because this yud is followed by hey, following this exception here. So, dagesh is omitted with two of the coal mine letters, except for this exception, where it stays. Let's look at the gutturals and resh. Now the gutturals and resh can be divided into two groups, or gutturals can be divided into two groups. The hey and the chet are called your strong gutturals. They're ones you pronounce. The aleph and the ayin are you either don't pronounce them that strongly, or they aren't pronounced at all. The ayin can be pronounced, but is a weak guttural, considered a weak guttural in comparison to these. And resh is grouped there. Now, what happens with the strong gutturals? The strong gutturals, you don't get gemination, you don't get doubling, which is the case for all these here. The only case where you actually have doubling here is this exception to the coal mine rule. Okay, so otherwise what we're dealing with here are cases where you don't have doubling. So it'll be no all the way down this column. No dagesh present. Now in the case of the hey and the chet, there's no change to the vowel either. So heichal, which means temple or palace, You add the article and it's just ha'hechal. Or chokhmah, which is wisdom, you add the article and it's just ha-chokhmah. You don't have any change to the vowel and you don't have the dagesh. So why do they call this implied doubling? They call this implied doubling, while in this case it's dagesh omitted. What's the difference? It looks the same, doesn't it? What's going on is this. In this case, you have a vocal shava under your yud, your first root vowel. Here you have some other type of vowel. When you have a vocal shava and you add the article takes that yud and makes it a closed syllable. So now this yud is part of the closed syllable. So you have CVC, CVC, a closed syllable, with a short vowel, and that's permitted. In this case, you have a consonant and a vowel, and that's it. This doesn't take this as its next consonant to make a closed syllable. You have an open syllable. And the open syllable, CV, has a short vowel. If you remember back to our rules of syllabification, CV unstressed should have a long vowel. In this case, it has a short vowel up here. The patach stays. And that's a short vowel, and that's not permitted. So what they say is, okay, we don't see a dagesh there, but really there is doubling happening, we just don't mark it. So I suppose you could say this is a CVC with an implied C there, final C. So that's why they call this implied doubling or virtual doubling, while this is just dagesh omitted. Let me get rid of this other thing here. Okay, so strong gutturals produce implied doubling. Weak gutturals produce compensatory lengthening. Again, you can't double them, but what you get is a lengthening of the vowel that precedes it. So with ish, for instance, meaning man, you have ha'ish, where the ha, the patach, changes to a kametz. There's no doubling here, and so it lengthens there. Similarly, ir, which means city, changes to ha'ir with the kametz rather than the patach. The patach, like this, lengthens to a kametz. And here's an example with reish, regel, meaning foot. Again, you have the kametz there. So, compensatory lengthening. Now, in both these cases, the strong and the weak gutturals, you have an exception. Exception conditions are here. For the strong ones, if you have a patach, if you have a kametz following these, or a chataf kametz, you get he. And that sounds quite different. He harim, the mountains, as opposed to haharim. He chacham, the wisdom, the wise man. This was the wisdom. He chodashim, the months. And down here, if you have a kametz under the ayin, just the ayin, you also get the same exception. It goes to he, so you have he'avim, the clouds. Now, the exceptions here occur with kametz, when kametz is under the guttural. In these two cases, and also here, and here you have a chataf kametz. And it produces the same exception. So note this here. There are conditions where you'll get he, which sounds quite different than ha. Finally, there's something called harmonization. Harmonization happens with an accented, when the first letter of the word is an accented ha or a. So a he with the kametz or an ayin with the kametz. And what happens then is that, let's look at some examples here. The vowel under the first root letter, in this case the aleph, will harmonize to match the vowel under the article. Now what I suggest here is simply just to memorize these 4 words and note that harmonization can happen. So eretz becomes haaretz, the land. Har, hahar, where they're both kametzes. In all these cases, they're both kametz. Ha'am, the people. Ha'avel, the iniquity. And this will tend to happen for words that are either monosyllabic or have the accent on the first syllable, because part of the requirement here is that the first letter be accented. So, what do you do with all this? What I would do is this. There's a lot of information here. I would keep a chart like this handy. A chart like this is available. And when you encounter them, glance at the chart to refresh yourself as to what category you're dealing with. Note that with these two coal mine letters and the gutturals and resh, you won't get doubling, with one little exception. Note that the vowel can change. He is the most prominent. It'll look quite different. It'll sound quite different. Ha will look different, but probably not sound different because you say it the same as these. And so note that the article can have he and ha. That's why I've colored these here. They're different. Be familiar with these categories. Dagesh can be omitted. You can have implied doubling, which means that it's omitted, but we're going to pretend it's there. Compensatory lengthening, we've already seen. A vowel that precedes what should be doubling lengthens in order to compensate for the fact that this isn't doubling. And harmonization, where you get both vowels, the article and the first root letter, harmonizing to be the same thing. Well, I hope that isn't too bad. I don't know how to make it any simpler than this.
And if he can make it simpler. Are there any questions for this lesson? Anyone? Let's have a look at you. Do you understand what is going on? This is the case where you have weak letters, and weak letters are letters that lose or cannot double. So you have to do something with the Dagesh forte when the article comes in. Okay.
I think we just need to memorize this chart.
Yeah. Or remember it. Remember it when you see it. I can share some of the words. Let's have a look at, for instance, here we see Haaretz. Let's do the annotate on. Yeah, I can draw. This is Haaretz, and you see that Aretz, this Kametz, is the same as this Kametz. I make a smiley. We know that the word is Eretz. This is the word for earth. But the Segol changes to a Kametz because of harmonization. The Aleph is a weak letter, so it cannot double. And there has to be something going on then. If the letter after the He cannot double, what happens? Well, in this case, with Haaretz, it harmonizes. That's why you get Haaretz and not Haaretz. So this is an example of what could go on. Let's go clear, operate. And I have another example. I think this one. Annotate. The temple, Ha-Hechal. So what you imply here is you imply that the He is doubled. This is implied doubling. If it was not implied doubling, this would be CVC, and then you had this strange combination. So you have to double it into Ha, He, and then He, Chal. This is implied doubling. CVC, CV, and CV, C. That's what happens here. So it's when you start to learn the rules, about how to read Hebrew, then you will notice, well, ha-hechal would not be normal if you would use the rules of CV and CVC with the vowels short and long. So you will start to learn that. This is one of the examples. Yippee. Any other questions or remarks? Okay. Well, this finishes the first 6 chapters. Applaud for yourself. Because this is a big accomplishment. And you don't realize it, but you will. Noortje and I did this now 2 years ago, almost 3, 2017, the first 6 chapters of the book. And we already from those first 6 chapters started to understand more of how to read Hebrew and what the letters and the words mean. So you have accomplished a gigantic task already, because it's not our normal language for us. We are not all educated. We are not all capable of learning such a difficult language all by ourselves. And that's why we have this group, to learn together and to be stimulated and helped and encouraged to study Hebrew. So what I hope is that you will give yourself a big tap on the shoulder and say, you've done it, the first 6 chapters. And what we've learned now is the basic structure of how Hebrew letters and words function in basis. So it's like more of a spelling rule, how to spell words. When does this happen and when does that happen, and rule of Shawah and implied doubling and all these difficult terms. You will get to know them when now we go into another section of the book. We are entering now the second part of the book, and we are going to work with nouns and with verbs. And we start a little bit with nouns, zelfstandig naamwoorden, and then we start working on verbs. But because remember, the Hebrew language is noun verbalization. I don't know another word, maybe I make it up, but what does it mean? That the noun in Hebrew are coming from verbs and not the other way around. The nouns in Hebrew always have somewhere a verb that is the origin of that word. And sometimes you don't see it, but sometimes when you go into Bible Hub, you can go deeper and deeper and deeper and see from this word, from that word, from, maybe I can show you, let's pick a little, let's try, I hope it works. Face. This is just a guess. From pana. So you see word origin over here. So pane is, let's make it a little bit. Panim, and pane is plural, is from pana. Now let's look where pana comes from. It's a verb. You see? Do you see it? It's a verb. So panim, noun, masculine, comes from pana, which is a verb. And it means to turn. So this is how Hebrew works. Most of the nouns have a basis in a verb. That's just to wisdom. Wisdom, where its word origin comes from chakam. What does chakam mean? See, it's a verb, to be wise. And what does it say? Word origin, a primary root. That means chakam, to be wise, is the origin, and from chakam comes wisdom. So wisdom implies to be wise. I hope you this two arbitrary, not just willekeurig. I don't know the English word. It just try the word wisdom, and you see word origin. It comes from hakam. So in Hebrew, excuse me, in Hebrew, words, nouns are coming from verbs in general. So we're now going to learn how Hebrew nouns are going to change. And we just had our Dutch grammar class, are going to change. Oh, so we have Hebrew nouns. They act differently in singular, plural, and dual. We'll get to that. And you have masculine and feminine. And you will see in a table that this word, this is the root. From a Hebrew noun, is the root is masculine singular, and feminine singular and plural all add something to the root. So this is going to be the first lesson of chapter 7, and I hope you enjoy it. Let's go first to some definitions, because where would we be without any definitions?
Some definitions. This module marks the move into some new material, new type of material. Up till now we've been looking at letters and their sounds, things like consonants and their final forms, vowels, short vowels, long vowels, historically long, the maters. We've looked at some other signs, things like the dagesh, the two types of dagesh, the two types of shavaz, accents, metheg, mapik, makev, etc. Now we're going to move into morphology and syntax. And I just wanted to define these so it's clear in your mind what they are, and so when I use the words, I know that you know what I'm talking about. Morphology is word formation, and syntax is sentence formation. And by word formation, I simply mean how words are made, all the different parts of words. And sentence formation is how those words are used in a sentence. A lot of what we're going to do in the next many modules is looking at morphology. We'll get some syntax as we go, but the bulk of it will be morphology. And we're going to look at nouns, we're going to look at pronouns and verbs, primarily those three groups. Less nouns than verbs. We'll look at verbs as we go on. We'll get more into verbs, and that'll be a big part of first year Hebrew is getting a hold of Hebrew verbs. Pronouns are also important. We'll see some pronouns that stand by themselves, but we'll also see pronouns that attach as suffixes to nouns and to verbs. And so we'll keep coming back to pronouns.
Does anybody understand what he says or don't? Verbs, I write it in Dutch, vervoegingen. That means all the different forms in present time and past time, etc. That is what's going to be happen. And the pronouns are two categories. They stand alone, or they are a suffix. And the suffix can be to a verb or to a noun. So pronouns are voornaamwoorden. Ik, jij, het, I, me, you, etc. And they are connected or stand alone. That's what he's saying here. Just thought I put a pause in here.
And also we'll come back to some of the things we've already dealt with, things like the inseparable preposition and what happens when you tack these things onto articles and etc. So we're moving into morphology, which is word formation, and syntax, or at least a little bit of syntax, which is how the words are used in a sentence formation.
Okay. Are you ready? I wish I could make some noise here. Now we're going to look at nouns. And the first word we're going to learn is horse. How does the horse behave when it becomes a female or double? Let's have a look here. Aren't you guys excited? I'm excited. I'm so glad that we're now getting into a part that we didn't do either. So it's as fresh for you and for me.
The noun. Let's take a look at how the noun functions or is formed in Hebrew. In Hebrew we have 3 numbers and 2 genders for nouns. We have the singular. I'll write them up here because I'm going to write a paradigm. We have plural, just like English. We also have the dual. And I'll spell this one out, D-U-A-L. And this is for words that come in pairs or twos. We also have genders. We have 2 genders, masculine and feminine. So it's something like French. Unlike German, German has masculine and feminine, and it would have a neuter here as well. So we have masculine and feminine. Now let's take a look at what the paradigm is, the pattern. We use the word sus. Sus is horse in Hebrew, so sus the horse. The masculine singular form is the base form, and all these other ones will use this, will build on this. So sus has no ending. Let's look at the feminine. Oops, that wasn't a very good samach, was it? Let's try this again. Oh, not much better, but you know what I mean. Sus. Now the ending, the feminine ending, is a. Now we'll find actually that the feminine ending, there are a number of feminine endings. These other ones are all fairly stable, but this one can have a number, and we'll take a look at that in a moment. But this is the base one. We'll memorize that one as part of our paradigm. So, sus and susa. Let's take a look at the plurals. Again, we start with sus. I'll change color again here just to highlight the ending. The masculine ending is im. So sus becomes susim. And it's a hidik yud mem. Hidik yud mem. Susim. And the feminine one is susot. Su-ot. Oops, I was going to do that in color, wasn't I? Susot. Holem vav with a tav. Okay. Sometimes you'll see this without the vav, it'll just be a holem, but it's still susot. So susim and susot. Finally, we have the dual. Now the dual actually has the same ending for both masculine and feminine. However, in the feminine it looks a little different, at least with this word. And I'll explain why in a second. But let's look first at the masculine. Give ourselves plenty of room, it's a bit longer. So sus becomes susim in the plural, and susayim. Susayim. This looks kind of similar to this. It's got this part looks similar, but the hidik is before the yud here, and here it's under. And what's happening here is this is a hidik yud. The yud here is a vowel. Here it's a consonant. And we know that because there's a vowel under it. So this is a, yim, and this is im. So don't get those two confused. Susim and susayim. Okay, now let us write down the feminine dual. It is su, and I'll change here. Susayim is the masculine, susatayim. And we get a patach here, or sorry, a kamet, here we get a patach. Susa, and then we have the piece we had here, Susatayim. Okay. This part is the same, ayim and ayim on the end, but here we have this at. Where did that come from? Well, what this is this. So the feminine dual builds on the feminine singular. Now, if we were simply to add the dual ending to this here, if we left this a hey, that's the only difference here. If we left this a hey, then we'd have two vowels together. It would be pronounced something like susayim. Now we know that Hebrew doesn't like two vowels together, double vowels. Double consonants are fine, but not double vowels. And so you'll find, and we'll see this as we move through Hebrew, that if you have a final hey on a word, like this, a final hey, and you add something on the end, the hey will tend to either drop or it will change into a tav. Here it changes into a tav, so we have susatayim. So it's still the same ending. The dual ending is here and here, but the ending of the feminine has changed a little bit. Okay. Now, what else do I want to say about this? I guess the important thing here to say is this is something to memorize. Let me put a little M here. And throughout these modules, I'm going to start to do this here. I'm going to put an M, try to remember to do it in the same color or the circle around it, to highlight things that are really important to memorize. This is a basic paradigm. If you memorize this, it will help you. You don't need to memorize everything. It's not efficient to memorize everything. Some things you should just learn for recognition. But this is something to learn to be able to reproduce. Write this down. Write it down on a piece of paper, whatever you have to do, so that you can reproduce it. That forces you to learn what all these little bits are. Because this paradigm will be the basis for other things. We'll add things to this. We'll change them. And if you don't know this one well, then you'll get confused when we add the other bits to it. So memorizing this will pay dividends for sure. And it's probably a good idea to memorize this by saying it. Sus, susa, susayim, susot. Sus, susa, susim, susot, susayim, susatayim. So say it, but also know what the endings are in isolation. Okay, you got nothing for the masculine. You've got a.
Even wachten, want ik zit te
For the
luisteren.
feminine singular, we've got im. We've got ot. Let me get that right. Ot, and we've got ayim over here for the dual. Ayim, and then, well, we have ayim. If you want to memorize just the endings, I recommend you memorize this thing with the sus. If you want just the endings, this is what they are. The at here is part of this, but there are some feminine nouns that won't have this, and so really what's going on here is these two are the same, the dual is the same, so that's kind of nice. A little less to memorize. So, now let us look more closely.
Okay, just a small pause for questions maybe. Or Noortje has a remark, okay? Yeah. So Noortje says that, yeah, that here comes an accent, susatayim, susayim, susatayim. Normally the accent is on the last syllable, susayim, susim. You don't see that, susot, susa. But here it doesn't go to this part, which is CVC. It goes to the part before this part, which is CV accented. And why is that important? Because CV has a long or a short vowel, normally, unaccented. This is a remembrance. Okay, please answer. Hello.
Long, I think.
Heel goed. Long. And CVC is unaccented. Short. So if this would be unaccented, you would have CV with what do we say? A short vowel. And that cannot be. So therefore, Noortje was right. And you heard him pronounce it, Susatayim. So the accent is on the second to last, the first to last, I don't know how to say that in English. De ene laatste. Okay? Let's clear this all up. Hoppata. Any other questions? Okay, let's continue.
Mostly at the feminine singular. There are a couple other ways you can make the feminine singular. So let's get a new sheet. We had this one. That's sort of the base one. We had that with susa. You can also have nothing. There are feminine words that have no ending. So they look kind of like a noun. Or sorry, like a masculine singular noun, because the masculine singular noun has no ending. But in fact, they are feminine. Examples are a word we've seen many times now, eretz. Eretz is feminine. Aim is feminine. Aim means mother. Eretz is land or earth. Aim is mother, and that is feminine, understandably. But it has no ending. It's just no ending. A couple other ones. We have yad, just as examples. Yad means hand, and up here I'll write another one. Regel. Regel means foot or possibly leg. Regel. Now these are body parts here. Paired body parts, eyes, legs, feet, whatever, hands, they tend to be feminine, just as a little bit of useful information. So we have the ending. We have no ending as a possibility for feminine singular nouns. That's what we're talking about here. And the third possibility is the ta. Now that shouldn't be surprising. Remember, changed to at. Well, sometimes you can just have feminine words that end with tav. Example of that would be brit. Let's see how I spell this. Berit. Berit. That's a yud. Berit. And berit means covenant. Or another example would be bat. Means daughter. So here we have two feminine singular nouns that end with tav. In the plural, however, they all go to ot. So plural is easy. Oops, that's a bad circle. The plural is easy. It's the feminine singular that has these three possibilities. Okay, lastly, let us look at a couple other features. This is not really morphology, this is how these words can be used. Singulars can function sometimes as collectives. You know, like in English you have sheep. Sheep can mean one sheep. It can also mean many sheep. There are also some words in Hebrew where singulars can function as a collective. Ugh, my writing today. Collective.
In Dutch dat is called een verzamelnaam. En een verzamelnaam is bijvoorbeeld een woord dat in het enkelvoud en in het meervoud. Voorbeelden zijn volk, bos, leger of vee. Vee kan een hele veestapel zijn, maar dat kan ook die twee paarden in de wei zijn.
And an example of that, a couple of them here, one is of. Of means bird or birds. behema. He. It's a meme. Behema. That can mean beast or beasts in the plural. And I'll give one more example, and that's 8. That means tree, but it can also mean trees. So bird, beast, tree can be used also as a collective. And just by way of review, notice these here are 2 feminine nouns that have no endings, not an a ending. This one has the basic a ending. So singulars can act as collectives. Conversely, plurals can act as singulars, or can mean something singular. So plurals can function as a singular. And the classic example of this is Elohim. So we have Elohim. So we know this is plural, right? It looks like a masculine plural word. You have the im ending here. This can mean, it can mean gods in the plural, which is kind of what you expect because it's got the ending. But it can also mean God, small g, just a God. Or it can mean like the God of the Bible, which generally in English we would capitalize. So it can be singular or it can be plural. Here's a plural that can function as a singular. In fact, most of the time, Elohim simply means God, the God of the Bible. So it's usually used as a singular. Another example would be damim. Dam is blood, and damim, you can see again that this looks like a plural. Well, it has a plural ending, damim. Morphologically it's a plural, but it can also, well, this here is bloodshed. Okay. All this to say simply that if it's morphologically singular or plural, it may, in fact, there are some times where it will function the opposite way. That's all that was about. Feminine endings have 3 types. We have feminine singular, we have the a ending, we have no ending, and we have tav. And what we first dealt with here is the paradigm, and this is something to memorize.
Okay, well, this finishes our lesson. We have started with a new chapter and a new part of the book. And we're now learning about verbs and about the 6 different ways a verb can end. The basic ending is the masculine singular form of a word. And all the other forms in a regular noun have female, plural, and dual. You've seen it. There are some exceptional sorts for feminine singular, and that have 3 different types. And there are some typical words that can be used in their singular form as duals, and there are some dual words that in their form can be used as single. So review the lesson and do the exercises, and you will get better and better in Hebrew. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope to see you next week again. And then we continue with gender flip. So what happens when it's called that way? What happens with a gender flip? Yes, very interesting. Okay, guys, see you next week. God bless. Doei doei.
Doei.